DWM in Germany and OEWG in Austria were locked in competition to rearm the world with new rifles, and so most smaller powers chose from one of their leading designs. Portugal, however, chose both. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Espingarda M904, the Portuguese Vergueiro. Let's take a look in the light box. With an overall length of 48.2 inches and weighing in at 9.6 pounds, this is a long, elegant rifle that chambers the 6.5 by 58 millimeter cartridge exclusive to Portugal, 5 of them in a magazine fed from a stripper clip. Now, as is tradition, I'm going to put this down and we're going to talk a little contextual history because there's a fair bit of workup to why the Portuguese came up with their own version of a rifle. These are the Portuguese Kropatschek rifles. We're going to do a lot more on them in the future, but for now, you just need to know that they are a marriage between a modified early Mauser action and an Austrian Kropatschek magazine system. These guns chambered in a black powder 8mm cartridge were the standard arms of the Portuguese military before our gun today. Which is kind of sad because that means that they ordered the most advanced black powder repeater on the eve of the smokeless revolution, making all that expense just to be outdated within a year. It's no wonder that they adopted at one point a stopgap rifle in the form of this short rifle, Mannlicher export style, technically a Schlegel milk action. You guys know all this stuff because we covered this before. Now that episode was centered on our Romanian rifles, not the Portuguese. As a matter of fact, Portuguese information has been very hard to come by, so we were very lucky since filming that episode to make the acquaintance of one Jaime Regalado. I wrote it in the description. Look him up if you'd like to know anything more about Portuguese guns, and I consider him a good friend despite the fact that I am butchering his name like I butcher all foreign names. Anyway, Jaime has given us a good old hand on sorting out some of the mess of the Portuguese acquisitions. Number one, we called this the Mannlicher 1896 because they were all marked 1896, and that's what collectors know them as. The Portuguese accepted them as the 1895. That's in no way confusing when you think about all the other Mannlicher 1895s, like the Dutch or the Austrian ones. Regardless, let's get things right. So, these guys were adopted originally for marine use, but they also found a home in the cavalry, who preferred them over their own Kropatschek carbines. This then freed those carbines up to be converted over to artillery carbines. Now, compared to the old black powder Kropatschek, this is a wonderfully balanced center stack rifle, right? And it has a beautiful flat shooting 6.5mm cartridge, and that's critical to the Portuguese eye because they want nice, long, even shots. And so, let's just make sure we review one little factoid so that you guys get this one right. Big, heavy bullets with large diameters are harder to speed up, and they fall back to earth quicker. Smaller, lighter cartridges can be sped up faster, making for straighter, longer shots. Now, flat shooting rifles with, nice even trajectories means that you do not often have to adjust your rear sight, and that is critical when you are a nation like Portugal at that time who's dealing with a strong, rural, uneducated populace. These guys are having trouble with literacy, let alone with dialing in for range and all that other stuff. It's better to just let the thing shoot where it points. And so they loved 6.5mm cartridges. And by the way, I don't mean to be insulting about, poorly educated troops, because sure, they could have learned it like anybody else, but stop and think for a moment. Even the smartest guy, do you really want him to have to stop and consider even one more thing in battle? You don't. It's better for him to just rock and roll, point, and click. So this was the state of Portuguese small arm. Lots of 8mm black powder Kropatscheks and some 6.5mm smokeless Mannlichers. It would stay this way until 1898, when a commission was set up to seek out a new infantry rifle. Now this board drew a lot of criticism right at the beginning because previously, like so many other countries, Portugal had actually had their small arms selected by the artillery side of the fence. And this time it was mostly infantry with some artillery officers present. Now these are all guys who are responsible for different training and schools and programs and ammo, and it's a good commission. But there's one character that stands out for our purposes today, which was an infantry captain by the name of Alberto Jose Vergueiro. I sadly do not have a lot of biographical data on our hero today, but I do know that he was born in Gabalim, which I am sure I'm not pronouncing right, in December of 1851, and would rise to the position of the director of the riflemanry class of the Lisbon garrison. So Portugal has a commission, and by the end of 1898, they actually had a fairly good idea of what kind of rifle they wanted. They wanted a turn-bolt rifle with a flat 6.5mm cartridge, central vertical magazine. They wanted clip loading. They wanted it to be capable of single shot or magazine repeating fire. They wanted a weight of no more than 3,500 grams, which is a mysterious unit from Europe. Minimum 5-round magazine and a removable magazine. This was for cleaning, not for hot swaps of magazines. All right, I think you can see the influence of this rifle right here. The only thing it doesn't really fit the bill is the removable magazine. And by the way, by that, I don't think they meant like the whole thing has to come out. Like, the Mauser has a removable magazine in the sense that the floor plate can come off and you can just scrub in there and plop it back on. That's good. This gun, no, there's no way to dump ammo out without it coming out the top, which you can do. It's not outside the realm of anything, but the problem is once you have that ammo out, you want to clean in here, and by the way, it welcomes in a lot of dirt. You got to get in there with a brush or something, or you got to take a screwdriver to it. You're not just popping it off and wiping it out. It's probably where they were going with that. All right, so with the Mannlicher influence aside, what is it that they're actually looking at in terms of rifles? We've got the export Mannlicher like they had before, the Spanish Mauser, the Vetterli Vitali, the Carcano, the Krag, and the Daudetto, and probably a few others. All right, I'm going to clear the decks for a second because I'm going to skip the dramatics and just tell you who the winners were, because they really came down to the good old already adopted Mannlicher, and they had a big eye on the Spanish Mauser. Now, this is a later model, but that's okay. It'll serve our purposes. Let's take a quick look, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, of course you're going to go with the Mauser, right? But they're not all that, it's not that easy of a choice yet. So let's take a quick look. All right, we'll get over to the camera. Here's our Mannlicher. Now, technically, this is, again, we talked about this. This is the Schlegel Milk Gewehr 88 descended. Austrians have the right to produce it for export now, suing over the magazine being used by the Germans without permission. Go check out our Gewehr 88 episode if you're confused by any of this and you want to know where this gun really came from. And check out our Romanian Mannlicher episodes on what happened after that. So, here's our split bridge, flag safety, bolt release on this side. We're end block clip feeding, which is actually more rapid, but more susceptible to dirt. Now the Mauser has a solid receiver bridge, nice strong, big extractor, absolutely flawless extractor. Drops in. This one's cock on close, although this is adaptable to cock on open. Big old bolt stop / release. Very rugged, very reliable action. Beautiful system and adopted all around the world and started beating the pants off the Mannlichers. But there are some benefits. Number one, this is available right off the bat and already geared up for 6.5. Yes, you could get 6.5 in a Mauser, but it's uncommon. It was much more geared towards heavy-hitting cartridges. This guy rocks a 6.5 already. It's a known factor, and it is extremely smooth. You do not get smoother than this action. It's also technically a little simpler, which the Portuguese liked. So they're familiar with it. They like the cartridge. It's nice and slick. But they have a good enough eye to know that the Mauser is probably the way of the future, because this is a frankly wonderful gun. And therein starts to lie the debate between the two pieces. And some of that was powered by internal politics. But that's the decision that's on the table when our good captain, Mr. Vergueiro, decides that maybe, just maybe, you can hybridize these two actions into one. However, before any of that can happen, with the Mannlicher slightly in favor, another man enters the fray. Paul Mauser himself paid a visit to Portugal in April of 1899. He brought along his new and improved Model 1898 rifle, the same we would see adopted in Germany. Many consider this the ultimate bolt-action rifle. I know of a few other meritorious designs, but that's another story. Yep, the 98 sweeps the field. Now, this isn't an early export. This is a later 1910 export. There's some differences up at the front. Don't worry about it. We're not going into that much detail on that particular gun just yet. But a Mauser 98 style rifle is what was up against the Mannlichers. And now the Mauser had the advantage. It was a clear winner in this category. And that's even after our good friend managed to, and I'm doing a lot of rifle swapping in this episode, so I'm getting my strength training in. Here we go. That's even after our friend Vergueiro turned up with a design of his own. He had taken both actions and combined the best features as he saw them into one smooth, reliable, and very simple to manufacture. Very few parts, very easy assembly and disassembly. Beautiful little system. More on that in a moment. He showed it off to the commission up against the Mannlicher and the Mauser. And they practically ignored him, which is unfortunate, but realistically, they were taking this new design much more seriously, and they also had a lot of old inroads with OEWG. It was an established company. They had already done contracts there. There may have been a little, nah, we're not paying attention to this local dude, which is sad because he took it so seriously that he resigned his commission in December of 1899 to make sure that there was no conflict of interest. Still not getting a lot of attention. So, Mauser 98 is the clear favorite. That is until, surprise twist, another player enters the field. We already have a whole episode on this guy, so go watch it, but this is the model 1900 Mannlicher Schönauer. It had been presented to the Portuguese along with a handful of other improved Mannlichers, but this is the one that caught their attention. Now, I already sent the Mannlicher Schönauer 1900 home, so I don't have it to display here right now, and we don't need it. We had a whole big episode on it. You guys saw it. So, that gun, compared to the Mauser 98, starts to gain some ground. Not at first, but after they start handling it, you got to think it's very familiar. It's very rugged. It feeds perfectly every time. And it has that 6.5 by 54 millimeter cartridge. It's a rimless version of their current 6.5 by 53. So they know it works. They trust it already implicitly. And it's coming from OEWG, where they already have a lot of contacts and money tied up in political yada yada. So the Mannlicher Schönauer is looking pretty good. And then the commission decides that it's time to pack things down in 1900 and put it to a vote. And the Mannlicher Schönauer won by a nose. The Vergueiro at this point wasn't even on the board. By the way, there's enough Mannlicher Schönauer 1900s in existence that we can tell that OEWG probably started production, which would actually be a shame. Because on the announcement of the Mannlicher Schönauer, everybody cried foul. Okay, look, you got a native design in competition. You've got Mannlicher Schönauer versus Mauser. The artillery side of things is favoring the Mauser, wisely. The infantry side is favoring the Mannlicher because they A, know it, but B, screw the artillery guys. And it's just turned into a complete mess. Nobody trusts anybody's decision. It's all a nightmare, and it all blows up. And there's a new Minister of War, and he didn't want anything to do with it, so he says, we're done, I'm shutting it down. And so, nobody won. Nobody. And so things would just wait until June of 1903 when the dust was cleared enough that they could start another commission. And this time, it was all infantry. And it was secret. Well, maybe not secret, but very private. They weren't inviting the military press to everything. Infantry's deciding this one. Nuts to all you guys. And they were able to get away with that because there was a general appropriation for roughly $4,500,000 of whatever currency. Sorry guys, I'm not an expert on foreign affairs. That number seems large because it was applied to 36 field artillery batteries with ammo and 100,000 rifles with ammo. That way they could just bundle and go, and it's nobody's business. Follow? Okay, good. So, with a new commission, we have to consider new rifles, sort of. This time it was the Mauser 98 export model, the Mannlicher Schönauer, a custom Mauser 98 pattern with a Mannlicher action inserted into it, and our custom Vergueiro action. I don't know if you guys are detecting this, but the Mauser part's almost inescapable. But there's just nobody who wants to actually hammer down on that action. And I still think it was some of the infantry just going, well, we're not doing what the artillery told us. I can't be sure, though. Anyway, in this instance, the Mauser Vergueiro won because, honestly, it was a good system. It had improvements over the standard Schlegel milk-style Mannlicher. It had all the Mauser features that they definitely wanted. And it was very, very simple. Very refined action. It's actually quite brilliant. So there should be some Portuguese pride there. The whole thing was going to be produced by DWM, over in Germany. And in that regard, it's probably explaining something about the ammo because, yeah, going from 6.5 by 53R, which is what they already had, and they wanted a rimless cartridge now, so they had to at least knock the rim off, but they couldn't go with 6.5 by 54, most likely because OEWG owned it, and also by trading out, since it won't be compatible anyway, they might as well add a few millimeters, get a little more oomph. That leads us to the 6.5 by 58 millimeter cartridge developed over at DWM. This would be a Portuguese exclusive, but still a healthy small bore cartridge. By the way, during tool-up for production, they were offered the improved Spitzer bullet and matching sights. Like the Greeks, they declined and stayed with the round nose. Now, with fewer eyes and fewer mouths on the issue, the adoption came a lot faster, December of 1903, at which point they ordered 100,000 of these with the new cartridge, and each rifle cost 73.75 francs at the time. The first half of the contract was to be completed by June of 1905, with the rest by June of 1907. DWM had officials from Portugal, especially Vergueiro, come over to the factory and help with the final refinements of the system. Now, this kicked off a series of little debates where you could see that the Mauser guys were trying to work in more features from their patents, things like gas mitigation, where it was going to extract, just general setup of the gun and sights was argued back and forth a little bit until it finally settled into its final pattern. At the same time, the Portuguese government was trying to arrange the purchase of the steel for their barrels. Now, they wanted to go with Bowler, beautiful company, but they couldn't. The contract wouldn't be signed. They couldn't get together with them for whatever reason. So they had to go to Krupp Marcotti, who still did an excellent barrel, or excellent raw steel rather, just maybe not as good in certain regards. So we're going to test it and make sure that it works. And it turns out that it did. But in true Portuguese fashion, they went ahead and had a scandal about it anyway, to say that somebody was bribed or they weren't willing to bet their lives on whatever. I don't even know. But they were mad. And so the whole thing slowed down again. So the first rifles wouldn't arrive until August of 1906. Still, the balance made it on time. And so with that, we can finally look at our rifle today, the Mauser Vergueiro model 1904. That's because that's when they started coming. Anyway, let's take a closer look. So, zooming in. Hey, first off, patented plastic pokey. This crest right here is for Carlos I. That would get a little embarrassing after 1910. Now, we have our markings on the side. In this case, it'll say 6.5. These could be struck out if the gun was converted later. More on that in a moment. Now, if you're looking at it, you're basically looking at a Schlegel-Milch style setup. We've got a split bridge, stripper clip fed though. That's part of the magazine system. Separate bolt head, small extractor, floated out cocking piece, all that usual stuff. In here, we've got a staggered fixed box magazine, easy release floor plate for cleaning. That's what they wanted. Overall, Mauser everything, Schlegel-Milch bolt action. However, it's been simplified further. So by comparison with the other old Portuguese Mannlicher, yeah, the bolt should seem extremely familiar until you realize that this whole real estate here has gotten a lot simpler. What they've done is they've gotten rid of, honestly, some pretty cool components. So we no longer have this guide finger here. We've slimmed up on where the safety applies to the cocking piece. We've sort of capsulized all of this. And the interesting thing is this guide finger, one of the biggest things that it does is it prevents out of battery rotation, which means that, unfortunately, our Portuguese is not protected from the same. It's just rounded off in such a way, and there's such spring tension that it's very hard to accidentally turn it, but you can turn this out of battery, not that I want to and have to recock it. All right, so to get her out, it's just like a Mauser 98 release. And I'll set that aside and we'll tour the rest of the gun just real quick. Mauser 98 style flat tangent sights, beautiful setup. The whole stocking with this flat nose cap and bayonet fitting, this is all reminiscent of the export Mausers like the 1904 and 1907. We're actually gonna talk more about those another day. So let me get this back forward, set her off to the side, and bring in the bolt, because this is the most fascinating thing, which is that they radically simplified everything that they could to get this down to the minimalist Schlegel-Milch Mannlicher style bolt. So to take this apart so that you can see it, we're just going to decock. We're decocked. That's rotated our bolt head because it's attached to that inner firing pin. If we spin this guy around so that the bolt head, and I'm sorry we've been firing this and I have not cleaned it all the way back up, that's going to drop off. So all I did was spin it so that that notch side of the bolt head came around to the solid lug, and this guy fell right free. How convenient is that? Now, she's under spring tension for this next part, so don't go too crazy, but if you keep on spinning this guy back the other way, 180 and then a bit more vertical, boom, we're free. That's keyed so that it can only go on one way. There's a notch so that it can only go on one way. You can only do this correctly, no mistakes. There's our pin, spring, bolt head, and cocking piece. I do not think you can get any more rapid than that on disassembly. It's a little bit of a balancing act to get it back together, but if you understand what the gun's doing, you don't have to think about it too hard. That is the beauty of the Mauser Vergueiro, Portuguese pride. So, I've gone as far as I can. Let's go ahead and turn it over to Bruno for an animation so we can see it a little bit clearer. First, we'll open her up and feed 5 rounds from a stripper clip into a staggered, flush, Mauser-esque magazine. The trigger and sear setup are the same 2-stage we see on both Mannlicher and Mauser sides of the family. This flag safety is again familiar to both, blocking the cocking piece. That cocking piece, however, is somewhat unique, greatly simplified from the Mannlicher side of the house. The rest of the action really is all Mannlicher / Schlegelmilch, so let's just go ahead and wrap this up. And we'll get it over to Mae. Boom, you know, this gun is over 100 years old, never really monkeyed with, and it's developed just a slight lope on the turn down. And when you have ammo in there, it catches just a bit, but I'm gonna say sample size of 1, it was probably butter smooth from day 1, and this thing's still in good firing shape. This is a good legacy to have. Now, I'm also particularly proud because I don't know that there's any other videos of 6.5 Vergueiros going off. These are very rare thanks to a later conversion process. So I want to say special thanks to Nick for loaning us this piece and to Mark for cleaning up the stock crack. Now, oh, and Jay for doing this custom ammo. And everybody who supports the show because, good lord, this is a network and I am not just one person. Now, anyway, these guns had to get issued. So who received them? First were the infantry troops at the practical schools. Then the regular infantry regiments and the cazadores, a type of light infantry Jaeger deal. Then the independent infantry and MG battalions. Then artillery, nuts to those guys. Then down to the engineers, aeronautics, and military colleges. So 100,000 of these guys is not enough to re-equip everyone. Now, the cavalry, they just stuck with their Mannlichers. That was fine. They already had them. And they're plenty modern. Now, other units like coastal artillery and other coastal defenses, and then railway engineers, things like that, these guys don't need frontline rifles, so they stuck with the Kropatscheks, although these at that point received a bit of an upgrade because they needed to be able to work with smokeless powder. By the way, I know we're a little out of order on these Kropatscheks with the Vergueiro, but here's the thing. The author has a book about the Vergueiro out that we can reference. He is still working on the Kropatschek. We are dealing with live data straight from the researcher, and we will bring you the best episode as soon as we can. The Kropatschek would also remain the rifle for colonial use for the Portuguese. That's so that they could keep everybody, soldiers, officers, Ascari, all on one 8mm cartridge. So no Vergueiros overseas at first, which means that the real first combat for these guns is sadly going to be at home on October 5th of 1910. This was the date of a coup organized by the Portuguese Republican Party, which deposed both the monarchy and the authoritarian regime of João Franco. These were, thankfully, sporadic and smaller engagements and didn't lead to any solid data on the performance of the rifle. I'm also pretty sure the chaos meant no lessons were going to be learned about ballistics this day. Now, I say this because there is a debate raging in Portugal at this time in the military, which is that should we have gone with this stupid 6.5mm? And this happened to a lot of countries that chose it, not because 6.5mm was a bad idea at the time, but because when it was adopted, all these countries adopted it in a bottlenose. You see a lot of 6.5 small bore up until the Spitzer cartridge. And that's because the Spitzer cartridge does away with the biggest downsides of the larger bore small bores. And if that's getting confusing, a bottlenosed 8mm versus a bottlenose 6.5, there's much more difference in terms of trajectory. A Spitzer 6.5 and a Spitzer 8mm, not as much difference. They're still plenty flat for plenty long, giving you all the advantages, and now you have the disadvantage of a lighter bullet. The Germans, and their big old 8mm, were winning out in the end. And so that created an internal debate in Portugal, and they had to weigh out whether or not 6.5 was the right decision, and they just bought these rifles anyway. And they bought them on the By the way, think about this one. You buy the best black powder rifle available right before smokeless, and then you buy the best bottlenose 6.5 available right before Spitzer. I'm so sorry, Portugal, but you guys got nailed twice. So sorry. But that means that these guns in 6.5 are untested in real combat up until war were declared. Now, in fairness, most Portuguese soldiers in World War I did not have to worry about 6.5 or 8mm because they were serving with 303. That's right, the Portuguese Expeditionary Corps was attached to the British and used British equipment. It is, of course, except in Portuguese Angola, where they fought directly with the Germans, with their own Kropatscheks and by then Vergueiros that were showing up down south. They largely went up against the black powder Mauser 1871, fielded by German Ascaris. In this matchup, both Portuguese weapons were superior, but they paled when facing the occasional Gewehr 98. Sadly, these conflicts did not go well for the Portuguese. They mostly got chased around Africa. Sorry, guys. In doing so, the Germans often captured Portuguese equipment and rifles and ammo, and so the Germans made a fair use of these guns. The Portuguese obviously had them, and interestingly enough, a third party in Africa would pick them up. The Union of South Africa would actually order these guys. Lord Kitchener himself would ask the Portuguese government to free up 20,000 rifles, with 600 rounds each for the South African Union Defense Force. I will point out that that's 20% of all Vergueiro production. And the Portuguese say, sure, take them. And then afterwards, the Union of South Africa says, you want us to pay you for those? And they go, oh yeah, that'd be good too. So they did get a little bit of payment in terms of some cash and some supplies and foodstuffs and things like that, plus telegraphs and things. It was actually pretty good for both sides. So Union of South Africa has these, and they start using them. And they find that they're very accurate, flat shooting, mild recoil, wonderful, except for the part where they're really not resistant to muck and mud. And so they start having to fill them up with graphite lubricant, and they cut holes in the end of their socks so that they can fit them over as an action cover to make sure that they don't get all dirty when they're not using them. It works out pretty well, I suppose. You can identify these guns by their receivers marked for the Union Defense Force. This marking appears to have been applied when the guns were discharged, given to the volunteers who carried them after the war. In March of 1916, the Portuguese would say, actually, we could use some of those back. So they'd request initially 1,000 rifles and 500,000 rounds. This would turn into 2,000 rifles and 2 million rounds. They really wanted to shoot some stuff. This was actually approved and the guns were transferred over to Portuguese Mozambique. Now, you can identify those rifles thanks to their stocks. They received and marked at Deposito de Material de Guerra de Lourenço Marques. I probably got that wrong, but luckily I wrote it on your screen. Now, the interesting thing is that these should be extremely rare. And think about it. You're a subset of a 20% subset. So you're 10% of 20% of all production. You are 2,000 guns. And yet, more of these seem to turn up than just plain ones. And more of the Union of South Africa marked ones turn up than completely unmarked. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are the only place in the world that these things managed to hide from the overall Portuguese conversion program that came much later. Because you see, this is the model 90439. Now, it has its own unique history, but we are not going to go into detail on it today, nor, and I'm sorry, are we going to shoot it, because this is fundamentally not World War I, and it deserves its own episode when we clear World War I. But just a quick peek in the light box, huh? Take your 1904, shorten it, and rechamber it for 792 by 57, plus a cool sight protector. 61,757 of the original 100,000 are noted as converted. With numbers like that, you would expect, let me put this aside, you would expect there to be a few more of these kicking around. This shouldn't be the hardest rifle to find, but it's actually one of the rarest that we've tried to deal with in the series. So that means that at some point, either plenty were materially lost in World War I or conflicts before 1939, or more were converted than we realize, or something, because there's just not enough in the international market. There could have also just been a period where some were destroyed surplus instead of being converted. I'm not certain, but these are very hard to find. So again, thank you, Nick. Now, let's get this thing over to Mae and get her opinion on what it's like shooting one of the most rare and sort of unusual actions of the First World War. All right, we've made room for Mae, and since we filmed these back to back, it's only been about 5 minutes since you saw us 2 weeks ago. That means she's still got a bit of a cough, so bear with us just a bit.
Sorry.
Now, today we have the Portuguese Vergueiro, a Portuguese original, and hopefully not the only Portuguese original we're going to have in the show. If anybody has an Abity, please let us know. I haven't found one yet. Here, take this over.
Okay.
We're going to go ahead and start, like we usually do, with the ergonomics. How do you feel about this hybrid rifle?
All right, so when I first handed this gun, I closed my eyes. Honestly, it just feels like an export Mauser. I mean, look at it. It's thin, it's sleek, narrow. It's got this nice handguard up here, long stock. You know what? Honestly, it kind of feels like a Swedish Mauser now that I'm thinking about it, except, hey, semi-pistol grip. Nice, right? I love it when they add that on there. It's the little extra touches that make a difference. You say all that, and then when I get to the bolt, smooth. It's like a Mannlicher bolt. This must be the smoothest Mauser, which is really kind of nice. I appreciate that. There is one thing I do want to say about this bolt, though. It has two problems with it that I did notice on range that I thought could be a problem later on. One, there's a small little gap here in the bolt that I feel like mud and muck could probably get in there and jam it up, which really would be an issue potentially. And then two, when the bolt is open, you can actually, and if you can see that, you can knock the cocking piece and essentially put the gun out of battery. Like, I cannot push this bolt forward to save my life now. You have to lift up on the safety and pop it back into place in order to operate the bolts again. So those are two problems I did notice with the bolt on range, but other than that, manipulation of the bolt itself is really nice. Except for one small thing, and I think it's particular to this gun. When bolting down right there, there is a small lope on this particular gun, and I know it has to do with this particular gun because I have handled one an 8mm before, and there was no lope. It was perfect. So I'm not going to hold that against this particular gun when I'm talking about my review on it, but I did want to make sure I pointed that out because that is kind of obvious in the shooting segment. But other than those few things I've mentioned, everything about this is very standard. The weight is very balanced as far as like what it feels like to have a Mauser in my hands. Like it's really nice. It feels comfortable. It's a nice middle of the road gun in my opinion.
It appears that the Portuguese, may I?
Sure.
We're not as worried about creating that sort of guide rod, well, not guide rod, but guide lug over top of the cocking piece like we said. So that means that yes, you can tie up the action by having it knocked out of alignment when she's out of battery. Now, the good thing about the design is that you sort of feel it. Everything starts to drag immediately because, since everything's keyed together in there, the whole system twists, including the bolt head twists along with it. So in their mind, I'm sure the bolt head kept it from twisting out of battery. But as you can tell, there's enough room, because you have to have allowances for the bolt to be able to snap in there and move. There's enough room that the bolt head doesn't truly keep it from rotating out of battery. It just keeps from it decocking entirely and having to pull that thing back and realigning it, which would be a bigger nightmare, yes. So minor nuisance at great savings in terms of material and complication to the bolt design. I can see exactly how this argument went down, I guarantee you. Now, other than that, I do agree. I mean, quintessential export Mauser. Good examples of these would be like the model 1904, 1907. Many people might have handled something like the Steyr 1912s that went to South America, Mexico, things like that. We'll actually talk about those guns in the future. And then honestly, a close cousin to this would be something like the Thai Mauser, which was modified a little bit away from an export Mauser. Again, the bolt system coming from Schlegelmilch, the Mannlicher side of the family. So, let me get it back in your hands.
Sure.
And get your opinion on actually firing a gun like this.
Shooting. Gonna load 5 rounds of 6.5. Staggers in there just fine. From a stripper clip. Gonna bolt forward. And this is a cock on open, so I don't really have to put a lot of force into that for closing it. And it's gonna work with me when actually operating the action, which is nice. I always prefer the cock on open, so those cock on closes. Lining up my sights. They're not very tall, but they're just standard Mauser sights, honestly. They're flat, V-notch sights, easy to read. Pulling the trigger, this is a very, very smooth two-stage trigger. There's a significant amount of take-up, don't get me wrong, but when you're about to reach that second stage, that little pull, the heavier pull on it, you barely feel the brake is going to come. I think I barely even pulled it a millimeter before it went off. It was nice. It was smooth, very, very clean. I thoroughly appreciated that. And then the recoil on this guy, I mean, I'm shooting 6.5 out of this. The weight, while evenly dispersed, in my opinion, was still decent enough that I think it really helped to mitigate that recoil. And I've got the semi-pistol grip to really pull it into my shoulder. Yeah, I felt like the recoil was very, very easy on this guy. Like, I don't feel like there wasn't any recoil. I just didn't feel like I'm shooting something like 30-06 out of this guy. No, it was definitely a nice, gentle recoil, in my opinion. But yeah, shooting-wise, I thought it was a lot of fun. I did decent with it on range. I just wish maybe they could have had a little bit of taller sights, maybe a stronger cartridge, just because the penetration power on that's not going to be super great against something like steel panels or stuff like that. But other than that, it was at least a pretty fun shooter, and I did decent with it.
I will say I have seen some Spitzer loadings for this gun. That is not the way they're configured as far as I was able to understand it. I did not see any record of changing the sights up to accommodate for the change in trajectory of a Spitzer cartridge, and I know that they were doing bottlenoses very late into the development of this gun, and most ammo on hand would have probably been bottlenosed. So, just a caveat before anybody says, well, I've seen at least one Spitzer cartridge. So, we've got the Vergueiro. It's smooth, like a Mannlicher. It's sturdy, like a Mauser. Does that make this the ultimate long rifle of World War I for you? Because I know that you like the durability of Mauser, and I know that you like the smoothness of the Mannlicher. We've certainly seen you praise other Schlegelmilch designs. This is it, right? This is your number one.
It does have the durability of a Mauser, and it does have the smoothness of a Mannlicher. I'll give it both of those, definitely. So, yeah, those are honestly fantastic pluses in my book. However, it could have a better cartridge, and I wish it were a little bit shorter just to kind of help with a little bit of that weight. So it's going to get a good solid yes in my book, and it is better than the average gun, like for the war. I will give it that. It does get a nice plus added to it. But I don't think it's going to quite make it into my top 10. So it gets a good solid yes, just not in my top 10 yes.
That is fair enough. So I'm going to have to make it harder. If you had to choose between this and the Gewehr 98, and for those of you who haven't seen that episode, and by the way, we'd like to readdress it at some point because it was very short compared to our now later episodes, but the Gewehr 98 is a long, heavy, totally Mauser 98 action. So you have all the durability of the Mauser, none of the smoothness of the Mannlicher, but still smooth enough.
Uh-huh.
But you have those Longa-Visier sights, the roller coaster sights that eat up so much of your vision.
Yep.
But you also get Spitzer 8mm, essentially not 7.92.
Yeah.
You get the Spitzer 8mm cartridge, versus the bottlenose 6.5. But actively, World War I's only being fought at certain ranges. Boy, we're starting to make you do some math. Vergueiro or Gewehr 98?
You know, and I really feel like there's no wrong answer here, but yes, I will say the Gewehr would be the better choice in terms of durability. However, I'm gonna go with the Vergueiro just because I wasn't fighting this one as much as I was fighting the Gewehr. Like those sights, like for the Gewehr, they were blocking it a little too much. And this one, it's just all the way around. It was easier on me, and I had an easier time as a shooter handling it. So I'm actually just gonna go with the Vergueiro this time. But I can't really see either one being a bad choice in my opinion.
Yeah, this one's going to be down to personal taste. For an army, I'm going to tell you 7.92 Spitzer is going to be much better than bottlenosed 6.5. But as an individual, especially if you could get a good Spitzer cartridge out of this gun, I think we're going to see Mae maybe have a better opinion of the Mauser when we actually get into the export models as we plan to do. But for now, you're right. That roller coaster sight is just so annoying.
Yeah.
Anyway, that wraps us up. I can't speak today, gentlemen. I might be catching her cold. That wraps us up for today. So let's put away the Vergueiro and say our goodbyes. Updates are after the credits.
Thank you, everybody.
This has been an extraordinary year for C&Rsenal, and I thank all of our supporters on Patreon, those of you who have loaned us equipment, and everybody who keeps contributing to the project. All of you, thank you so much. And I hope everyone enjoys their holiday. But I am not going to go much more into that because it's time for me to get some sleep.